Welcome, everybody. Once again, this is Rafa coming to you with Mystic Times. Thank you so much, everybody, for being there. Thank you for joining this beautiful ride, this beautiful journey into the exploration of all things mystical. Today, I have once again the great honor and the great joy of having my dear friend Michael Cremo on the show. He's written books about that are called Forbidden Archaeology, so books about extreme human antiquity and great discoveries that have been made that push history or the origins of man or the origins of civilization very, 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 very much into the past. And today we're going to have an amazing conversation. How are you, Michael?
I'm fine. I'm in Los Angeles. A couple of weeks ago, I was in India. It was good. It was my first visit, my first return to India since the COVID pandemic started. So that's been good. So yeah, I'm doing fine.
Awesome. Yeah, I've never been to India, but I'm very, very I resonate very much with the culture and especially with the spiritual side of it. Um, I sometimes feel that I might have had a previous incarnation there, but then again, if you think about previous incarnations, we've probably incarnated all over the place, all over the universe, perhaps even. But I definitely feel a resonance and an affinity with Indian culture and Indian spirituality. That's a point that you and I have in common, and that's something that I like about our conversations, that we get to explore all of your, let's say, your academic work regarding extreme human antiquity, but we also get to explore that from this other perspective and bringing in some more elements of Indian or Hindu spirituality. And today I had the idea of looking at something that it's still a kind of, I wouldn't say exactly taboo, but still a kind of poo-pooed idea or a woo-woo idea. I love all these words with "oo," which is the idea of Atlantis. And the main reason why I wanted to bring this up is because I feel that Atlantis is, of course, if we look at the idea of Atlantis as being an ancient civilization, perhaps even, or most definitely, a worldwide civilization with different main cities across the world and different versions of it. We see that, and when according to the story, Atlantis falls, what happens is different groups from Atlantis spread across the world. So if we think that Atlantis, for example, was in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, kind of in between like Spain and Portugal and kind of Central America or something somewhere around there, we would see those currents going across the world. But at the same time, I'm thinking, what about India? What about the Hindu culture, which for some reason I believe it is connected to Atlantis? And that's kind of the area that I would like to explore, the connection between Hinduism and Atlantis.
Well, I think it all depends upon how we define Atlantis. You were defining it in one way, and it depends upon which aspect of the long history of the Vedic culture in India are we speaking about. Now, in terms of Atlantis, many people will use Plato's account of it in some of his writings. And there it's described as kind of an island beyond the Pillars of Hercules. In other words, it appears to be in the Atlantic somewhere, but there are different researchers who have said no, it was an island in the Aegean Sea, in the Mediterranean area. Others have put it in the Alto Plano of Bolivia. But just in general, the idea that there was a worldwide civilization that was very advanced in many senses of the word is something that we also find in the Indian historical and cosmological texts, the Puranas. There we find the idea that uh, if you go back 5 or 10,000 years, you would find there were emperors that ruled the entire world. And this is it's not necessarily like a dictatorship that's controlling everybody's lives, but we've seen even in the history of the world there was the British Empire that was spread all over the world. There have been other world cultures that have spread their influence widely all over the planet. So at that time, there are descriptions of emperors like Eustace and others whose influence spread around the world. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean there weren't any other independent states, but they cooperated with that worldwide government, which was based on principles very different from today's governments, which are mostly quite materialistic, even if they have some connection with some manifestation of religion. It's generally religion to help people get more and more material things. That's what they pray for, and that's what they're promised. But the Vedic culture was based on the idea that every living entity on this planet is a being of pure consciousness that has somehow or other come under the influence of the material energy. And under the influence of the material energy, the conscious self, instead of identifying with its own spiritual nature, it falsely identifies with the material bodily vehicle it inhabits. So society was structured in such a way that people could satisfy their material needs in a very simple, natural, efficient, and fair way, while putting most of their energy into self-realization and God realization. And this means that the goal of the civilization was to elevate the consciousness of the citizens, and not just the human citizens, but all of the living things within that realm, so that they become free from their contact with matter. Because in contact with matter, we undergo a cycle of birth and death again and again and again. So the real goal of a nation state or an empire or any system of government and social organization is how many souls get liberated from the cycle of birth and death and go to that spiritual level of reality. That's the actual measure of the success of a state.
Instead of
Not
the GDP?
not the GDP or how strong its military is, because we want defense. We want to be defended, but the real defense, the real problem is how do we defend ourselves against birth and death, old age and disease? And I mean a permanent solution to disease, not the temporary curing or alleviation of some of the symptoms of different kinds of material diseases, but to get out of the whole cycle of birth, death, old age, and disease. That's the real benefit that a state, a government, a leader of people should be able to deliver. And on that basis, I think we have to give most of the governments today, practically all of them, a very poor grade.
So one first thing that I find interesting, and I like the, let's say, the correction or the clarification you make. We and I usually speak of Hinduism when maybe a more correct term for what we're trying to explore today is Vedic culture, which on the one hand, I understand Hinduism is more like a kind of misnomer given to a kind of generalization given when during the British colonization of India, calling many, perhaps even hundreds of different belief systems, giving them just one single name, where similar to recently in another episode, I talked about the Celts and the Celtic tradition. I find the kind of similarities there in not just in the underlying spirituality itself, but also in this idea of calling many different kind of smaller tribes by one single umbrella term, which I think Hinduism does that. Not that there's anything wrong with it, but to be, I guess, a little bit more precise in what we're talking about, I think Vedic culture is more representative in the sense that it goes back further in time, rather than just thinking Hinduism, which is a kind of more modern term.
Yeah, the terms that we find in the Sanskrit literature, the Vedic literature, are things like Sanatan Dharma,
Mm-hmm.
the eternal activity of the soul, you know, as being what we would call, you know, religion, or but it's something beyond you know, belief in some doctrine. It's something that's actually realized and experienced, or can be realized and experienced if one follows the I'm going to use the word scientific in this sense, that there are processes of meditation and yoga that can deliver realized experience of one's eternal nature as a being of pure consciousness. So, but you know, you have to properly practice these disciplines.
Mm-hmm.
But that's something else. But yeah, you're right. There, I mean, just like you use the word, say, Christianity, for example. Well, yes, there is Christianity in a general sense, but if you get down to the specifics, there's Catholics, there's Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, Church of England, Methodist, Baptist, Episcopalians. There are others who consider themselves to be Christian. Mm-hmm. So I can understand, you know, sometimes people have to use general terms, but if you get down to the specific realities of the actual groups, then you find it's not so easy to characterize them all under one label.
Yeah, and I think the same thing happens with the term Atlantis itself that we're bringing up here.
Yes.
We there's like you mentioned at the start, different definitions. Maybe some say an island here or a culture over there, and etc. And and perhaps we can call it Atlantis in the sense that perhaps they shared uh, a, a piece of the timeline together. So things that were happening at the same time and that had similar uh, worldviews or similar methods of interfacing with the world. And so we could call those things Atlantis. Um, but
Yeah.
there's probably slight or even marked differences between the different places in the world where this more general culture was existing. And I think that's where I draw the connection with the Vedic culture in a way, because I'm thinking, okay, like you said, in the Puranas or in different books, you see in the like the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita within it, you see histories that apparently go many thousands and perhaps sometimes even millions of years back. And you think, okay, so let's say this was happening at the same time as Plato's Atlantis. Okay, so if this was happening at the same time, could we say this Vedic, or perhaps it's even a proto-Vedic culture? Could we say they were kind of part of, or different tribes that are put under the umbrella of Atlantis? And at the same time, or the other question would be, or the other way to look at it is, okay, on the one hand, we have this giant umbrella called Atlantis, which includes many smaller groups or cultures or interpretations. But at the same time, in parallel, we have also the Vedic culture and perhaps a few others around the world that were co-inhabiting the same timeline.
Well, yeah, there's another way to look at it. This may be my personal bias, but it is that the idea of a worldwide, spiritually advanced, and technically proficient society existing is, I think, a reality. And it may have been, uh, so that reality is there. And what the actual identity of that culture may have been is something different. Like you say, it's divided up now, and people identify different centers of culture in different parts of the world. But if you actually study the Vedas, they talk about a worldwide civilization that was based on the Vedic culture, and it was spread worldwide. And in other words, today, people identify in terms of I am American, I am Western, I am Eastern, I am Latin American, I am European, I am Chinese, I am this, I am that. But the Vedas is based, the Vedic culture is based on the idea that we're all spirit souls. I'm a being of pure consciousness, you're a being of pure consciousness. We're all part of the same family. There's on that level, there is no such thing as I am black, I am white, I am yellow, I am red, I am brown, or I am American or Russian or Chinese or Brazilian or South African, or on the level of being a conscious personal individual, we're beyond all of that. So uh, that has to be the basis of a worldwide culture. Now, when that broke down, you could say well, the Vedic culture became confined to some specific geographical region of the world, and other parts of it broke into other cultures, in different geographical locations, and they consider themselves separate. But I think the identity of that culture, that worldwide, global, spiritually advanced, and technologically advanced civilization, it may have been something like the Vedic culture. When we use the word Veda, just in term, Veda is a Sanskrit word, it means knowledge. So this knowledge was common to the whole culture. And it was based on seeing the essential equality of all living things. And it was organized on the principle that we're just here temporarily. Let's try to get our citizens to that level of pure consciousness where everything can just go on without any interruption, without any mixture with unpleasant things that happen on this level of reality. So that, and even historically, when I look at it, I see the influence of Vedic culture was even in fairly recent times after the fall of the united worldwide civilization. You still see traces of Vedic culture widely spread. And for example, Sanskrit is considered to be one of the Indo-European languages. And even, European scholars who came to India during the colonial era, they noticed the similarities between Sanskrit and all the European languages. So they came up in linguistics with the idea of the Indo-European family of languages. So that sort of indicates some cultural connection between all of the European peoples and the people that were inhabiting the what's today considered to be the center of Vedic culture, the Indian subcontinent. And that cultural influence spread widely over Southeast Asia. They would call it Indochina, because I've been to Cambodia and I've visited the Angkor Wat temple, which is a Vishnu temple, but it's in Southeast Asia.
It's amazing. I would love to visit it one time.
Yes, and then in Java, they have, if you look at the old architecture, they have Hindu temples, Vedic temples all over what's now Indonesia. And Buddha was a spiritual leader that appeared in the Indian subcontinent. And the Buddhist influence spread all over Asia. And in more distant places like the Americas, there are temples of traditional cultures there, like the Aztec and the Maya, that resemble very much the Indian temple structures, especially from South India. There, the places like Chichen Itza in the Yucatan region of Mexico. It's one of the Mayan centers. They have huge pyramid-like temple structures there that look just like temples in South India. So uh, this, but this worldwide Vedic culture would have been different in some ways from what is now considered to be uh, the Vedic culture. Yeah, those are, yeah, you've got some pictures up there of,
Yeah, I actually went when I was very young, like 10 or something. I went to here to Chichen Itza, and
yeah,
yeah, it's crazy.
yeah,
And
I
now
went
that you
there.
mentioned the connection with the southern Indian temples, even though uh, there is a slight aesthetic thing that's different, like these are very colorful and with lots of deities. But if you kind of take that out, it's very similar, definitely.
Yeah, and
I
there
see the
are
resemblance, yeah.
even more detailed correspondences between the art and architecture, and
Which would make sense, you know, given the large distances between one place and the other.
yeah. Uh, so apparently, the ancient world may have had some unifying culture at one point.
Yeah, I
But
think
then,
the
as you
evidence.
said, it became divided up,
Mm,
and uh, and people are suffering because of the divisions,
mm.
because the leaders of the different divisions tend to get into conflict with each other. I think people are actually looking for some unifying principle, but that can only take place if we recognize our identity
Mm.
as beings of pure consciousness. Right now, we're being told, well, we're machines made of matter in competition with each other for survival. So, just individually and collectively, we have to try to dominate, control, and exploit the material resources, our share within our borders of our country and then other countries. Yeah, and then sometimes some countries try to get resources from other ones, either through business means or by military conquest. It's and you get this whole system of power structures and competition and fighting, and sometimes cooperation, but not the cooperation of everyone, the cooperation of my group against this other alliance. It's never ending conflict at that level, and also environmental destruction too,
Yeah.
because if your purpose is to maximize the production and consumption of material things, you're going to make unsustainable use of the earth's
Mm.
resources. Not only are you going to fight about things, but you're going to destroy the environment.
I really
And
love that perspective. Oh, sorry, you were gonna say something else.
well, I was just going to say that there are sincere people who are trying to find solutions to these problems, but I think until they shift their basic worldview, it's not going to be possible on the basis of the current worldview that we're machines made of molecules, we're purely material beings. Anything that's non-material is outside the realm of science, and
Yeah.
civil discourse. Privately, people can believe what they want, but in terms of the structure of society, it's you have to treat people just like they don't have souls. They're just material beings, and they have to produce and consume in competing groups. There's never going to be any solution to the problems that are confronting the world, even though there's so much wealth being produced, so many technological advances being made. Still, there are huge problems. And I know sincere people are trying to manage those problems. But until they switch their basic worldview, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, I like the point you're bringing up. I think it's very, very valid and very relevant today. Thinking about our world culture, we talk many times about we have globalization and a global culture, but what are the values that make us one culture? What are the values that unite us today, nowadays? And I think the perspective you bring, of course, it it clashes perhaps with, or it receives a clash from the atheistic view that this materialistic slash atheistic view that is also so prevalent in, and I don't know how prevalent it is. That may be a question for another day. But it has a certain uh, power these days, or a certain influence, despite maybe not being the the worldview of the majority of the world, but of a select few that have enough influence that that their numbers don't really matter as much. But yeah, I'm thinking, like, what is it that unites our culture today? And the point that you bring up of trying I would call it kind of like flipping our perspective from this character that's in the game, in the system, to the player outside of the system, the part of us that comes into the body and animates the body. Mhm. Of course, looking at it from in my opinion, the incorrectly called scientific view is that no, there's no soul. I don't think they've ever found evidence to prove that point, but still it's uh, expressed as if it has been demonstrated that there is no soul. But whereas on the other hand, there's a lot of perhaps not definite evidence, but interesting evidence to look at from an objective point of view, and no doubt from a subjective point of view, you yourself have had, and so have I, and that's why we are on this spiritual path. We have had transcendental experiences that have given us this Veda, this knowledge, this gnosis of there being something else, of us being something other than this body and this mind and these emotions and these uh, opinions and this point of view, but rather being ourselves, being something that is outside of all of those tags and names and forms, but actually something that transcends all of that. And definitely, I see what you mean when thinking about that past. Perhaps it was closer to a kind of golden age because people were uh, incentivized to explore themselves and learn more about who they are, and unifying the world uh, behind this, or with this idea of who we really are on a consciousness level. That's it makes me very emotional to
It,
imagine
it
the
is.
possibility of bringing that back.
It is something that should inspire emotion for a thoughtful person. To see, like there was some famous saying, I forget exactly who said it, but if you keep doing the same thing, you can't expect different results. So if people keep on going on the basis of this understanding that I am the material body, that's what I am, and my purpose in life is to satisfy material desires by producing and consuming more and more material things, then nothing's going to change ultimately. But you were mentioning atheism as contributing to this, and that may be true to some extent, but also religions that focus simply on satisfying the material needs of the population are also contributing to this. In other words, the atheist may be saying, okay, there's no soul, there's no God, we're just here to exploit the resources of material nature. Let's produce and consume more and more material things in order to satisfy ourselves. Now, I think the religionist or the religious leader that simply says, okay, let's pray to God to help us produce and consume more and more material things. And the behavior of the two will be exactly the same. Let's pray to God to help us win this war against our enemy. Let's pray to God to give us more and more material things to produce and consume. Let's, the behavior of the people either way is pretty much the same, whether they're an atheist or a member of some religion.
A common aim. That's why when I was saying that, I corrected myself and I said atheistic / materialistic, because just like you're saying and looking at it also from the other side, you could even say some atheists have a more spiritual view than probably some religious people do, in the sense that, for example, you could expound a belief in there being no God and have values that are more spiritual and more nurturing of oneness and unity than a person who believes in a God. And you could even say that is in a certain way, I hope not to be very ignorant and not to offend anyone, but kind of Buddhism gives me that kind of a perspective that's kind of around there. There is no God, but the most important thing is to understand we're living in an illusion and to help others realize this and become free of suffering. So it's kind of, in a certain way, an atheistic view with beautiful values behind it, whereas some religions or some sects within certain religions might say, there is a God and we must kill those people who don't believe and make suffer those people who don't believe in this God,
I think in most religious traditions there's kind of an esoteric understanding and an exoteric understanding, and the exoteric understanding usually has to do with we study this book and we pray to God to give us our daily whatever we need and all of that. It's very ritualistic and external in its approach to things, which is maybe suitable for some people, but usually in any tradition they have something that's more inner directed to realizing one's personal relationship with God and living as simply and natural as possible. And usually the people like that, they tend to withdraw from society a little bit, like live a monastic life or as a Buddhist or uh, Franciscan monks or Greek Orthodox monks on Mount Athos. And, there are different, you could say, more esoteric and mystically minded threads of these traditions, which I think are striking more at the essence of what a spiritual path should do. But
Yeah, I think that's beautiful. And one more thing I was thinking about this side of the conversation is, okay, so you were saying there used to be this uniting set of values that were connected to an understanding of our true self or our true nature or our essence as pure consciousness. And I'm thinking also, like, okay, so what I ask this question again, what is it that today unites us, that we are able, or that we usually say we are living in a global culture, in a worldwide culture? um, I'm thinking and well, one answer to this second question is definitely not the unification through an understanding of our oneness, beyond all the veils and all the masks. But I'm thinking, is there a what could be a possible way to pave the road towards that spiritual oneness or spiritual unification of people, uh, irrespective of the beliefs or the different ritualistic practices that anyone might want to have, but this gnosis of this understanding of, okay, we are all actually not our bodies, but something greater, something beyond, something behind, and trying to evolve all of that understanding across the world in a loving, peaceful way, etc., etc., of course. But I was thinking that a possible way of going over there is taking this kind of intermediate step, which I think I kind of see the not exactly the mainstream yet, but um, parts of culture I see moving towards the understanding of something that I like to call it, like, we are living two lives at the same time, and
yes,
and so valuing that we are in this body and we are experiencing all the material world, because there is suffering, there is pain, there is pleasure, um, there is experience and experiments and things to do and relationships to cultivate and etc., from a human or from a materialistic or body perspective. And I call this the third person experience. But at the same time, there is this first person experience that is behind, or that is looking at the the character playing the game and having all of those experiences, and trying to unify those two, and trying to see the thread that is um, common to both lives that we're living at the same time, in order to stop the forgetting that happens every day, every hour, every minute. We forget that there's this other greater part of us because it's kind of uh, partially veiled. And so trying to cultivate that clearing of that veil and that polishing of our hearts, so as to keep remembering that there is this other part of us. So a kind of intermediate step that would slowly help us get to that to that one. So I guess kind of like first a recognition of Atman, right? In order to then recognize Brahman, maybe.
Yeah, well, there are intermediate steps that can be taken, because I think you're right. When we look at the world's problems, we've got uh, like there's ultimate solutions, they're the long range solutions, but until that can be achieved, you have to think about more middle range kinds of solutions. And some very positive trends that I see in the world is the growing trend for people to adopt plant-based diets, vegetarian or vegan diets that really reduce the amount of suffering in the world, in terms of you're not involved in killing animals, which are living things. They have feelings, they have consciousness. So if we can reduce the amount of uh, bad karma that's being generated by these other activities, by changing our diet, that's something everyone has to do. Everyone eats every day, unless one is extremely unfortunate, which has to be dealt with. But I think that is a very positive contribution. I think the idea of downsizing a little bit, you know, there are many people in the world who, after they're with good intentions, they may become involved in some company or some activity, and it just becomes too stressful, and they kind of downsize, move out to the countryside, try to find like-minded people, to learn how to live in a more simple, natural way, so that they're able to have a better sense of self. That's positive. There's I've been noticing that uh, practice of yoga and meditation and things like that seems to be continuing to spread. I think that's useful. That's a helpful trend. So there are things, smaller steps, medium range steps one can take that will, I think, bring the temperature down. But ultimately, I think without understanding that we're not these material bodies, we're part of God, really, and we belong in the spiritual world, not the material world. Ultimately, has to be part of it as a long range solution. But you're also correct that for a really advanced person, they will they don't care whether they're in the spiritual world or the material world. They're just interested in relieving the difficulties and suffering that people undergo on this level of reality, or help them to appreciate and understand it in the right way, so that it becomes part of their spiritual journey. So, like the bodhisattvas in Buddhism, and Shakyavesh avatars and the Vedic system of thought, they they're prepared to remain in the material level of reality as long as there are people there that they can help in some way. Um, so, but to bring it back to Atlantis, the idea that there was a worldwide civilization that uh, either went under the water or was the victim of some other type of catastrophe, and then the remaining people split up. Either they were in different parts of the world and they became separated, or they went from the center of civilization that was destroyed in some way and migrated to other parts of the world. I think that that basic concept is something that I can accept, and I think
Yeah,
it's
and probably both at the same time, right?
yeah. And I'm not primarily an Atlantis researcher, but I I hear about these things and I read about them. And once I was at a conference that was focused on Atlantis, and I was attending different workshops and things like that, and one of them, uh, I think the lady who was running the workshop had us go and had the participants go into a meditative state. Maybe it was even a kind of hypnosis or something, but uh, we were regressed, perhaps. In other words, we were definitely asked to imagine you're in Atlantis, and during that exercise, I had a vision, of myself as a teenager, one of many teenagers that were on this island, and we were being sent to some kind of craft, either a boat or some other type of transportation vehicle, to evacuate from the island and go somewhere else. Now, I don't know if that was a real past life experience that I had and that it was connected with Atlantis, but I definitely had that sensation. Yes, some catastrophe is coming. People know about it. They're sending their children off this place that's going to be subject to this catastrophe, and uh, hopefully wherever they go they'll be safe. So uh, those kinds, I did have that experience once. I mean, how exactly to interpret it and understand it, I'm still thinking about. But just in general, the idea that there are inhabited parts of the world that are now underwater, and is even part of mainstream archaeology. I mean, they understand that over the past 20,000 years or so, the glacier ice caps on the continents in the northern and southern hemispheres have been melting, and that means the sea levels are rising. So thousands of years ago, there were areas of land that were inhabited that are now underwater, and marine archaeology is a growing activity in the world of archaeology. So, and the accounts of ancient India, they tell of for example, the city of Dwarka, which was Krishna's city, it when Krishna left this world to return to the spiritual world, said the sea covered over uh, his capital, Dwarka, and there's still a city that has the name of Dwarka in northeastern India, and divers have gone offshore off the coast of the current city of Dwarka, and they've found remains of an ancient city under the ocean waters in the sea off the coast. So some people would say that is perhaps remains of that ancient city that was very advanced culturally and spiritually.
This has been a very fantastic conversation once again. I love how we take some detours into spiritual explorations and conversations about the state of the world and how we could possibly help uh, or start to think about solutions for creating a more peaceful world. I love how we start off with very with very, let's call them like mental topics, like, okay, so what about Atlantis, what about its connection to the Vedic tradition, and then end up talking about the nature of the self. I love the path that our conversations take. um I had something else that I wanted to say, but it just escaped my mind. So in particular, I wanna I wanna appreciate and thank you, Michael, for your time once again as we are coming to a close. I want to thank people for listening, and I wanna I wanna tell people to just take some time to process the information, see what resonates, what doesn't. Come back to the information later, and see after some some time of exploration of your own self, see an exploration of the topics themselves as well. See if you can come back and find something that you missed once, because I really think we've touched on very very important issues here. Michael has a wonderful view, uh, a wonderful perspective, being somebody with such a beautiful balance of left and right brain, having the bhakti practice that you have, as well as the scholarship that you do, and at the same time exploring things that are so weird and so unique, as having artifacts that suggest the existence of humans millions of years ago, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
if readers or listeners or viewers are interested in these things, they could visit my website, mcremo.com, mcremo.com. My books are available there.
Yeah, I have your website over here. Just move this bar. There we go.
Yeah, I
I
guess.
have your website over here. There we go. Yeah, I encourage people to check this out if you don't already know about Michael's books and Michael's work. It's just mind blowing. But I'm guessing if people are listening to this like higher level even conversation, they probably know about your work, and they're
Yeah.
also interested in your spiritual perspective that you bring to the subject. Yeah, but anyways, I really recommend people check these books out. Um, so I don't know. Is there anything that you think we maybe could talk about a little bit, a couple minutes before we finish, or something that maybe we missed,
Well, um,
or
well,
something we could, yeah.
when I was in India recently, I was part of the reason I was there is a project that I'm involved in, the Temple of the Vedic Planetarium. which is presenting the Vedic cosmology. You know, it'll be a temple, a place of meditation and prayer, but it will also include a museum and planetarium theater, which will be presenting many of the things we've been speaking about today. And that is, it's kind of based on the text, the Bhagavad Purana, or Srimad Bhagavatam, as it's called, which is one of the most advanced spiritual texts of the Bhakti tradition in India. And it's interesting how that worked. It's like I said, a Purana. It tells about the origin of the universe, the origin of living things, and what their purpose is. And it the work begins with a group of sages gathered in the Naimisharanya forest in northern India. And their gathering took place about 5,000 years ago, just before the onset of the Kali Yuga, which is considered to be a dark age. You know, there's a whole cycle of yugas: Satya, Treta, Dwapara, and Kali. Satya Yuga is a golden age, and then things get progressively worse in the next two ages. And finally, we come to the age of Kali, which is predicted to be an age of increasing environmental and social disturbance. So the sages were thinking, from our vast store of Vedic knowledge, what are the essential truths that we can communicate to the people of the coming age of Kali, namely us? What are the essential truths that they should be aware of that will help them navigate through this difficult age, when things are going to be so disturbed in every sense of the word? So the answer of the sages really comprises the substance of the Bhagavad Purana, which is the basis of this museum, planetarium, temple complex. So it's a really interesting project to be involved in. And as I said, it deals with many of the topics we've been discussing.
Awesome. That's a great resource for people to check out if they're interested.
Yeah.
Well, I'm extremely happy and grateful once again for your time, Michael, and I'm also thankful for everybody that's been watching. If you want to get in contact with me, you can find me on Instagram. My handle is @manrafa, and what else? Well, we have a Patreon for the show, which you are all very much welcome to look at and join. It's on patreon.com/Rafa Martinelli, so my name. And what else? Well, I've got some music, meditation music and relaxation music that I'm posting on the YouTube channel as well, along with these conversations. There's also, I posted my first meditation recently, and I'm making a few more, and I'm very excited to share all of those as well. And well, yeah, Michael, any closing words?
Oh, I don't know if this will reach viewers in time, but at the end of April, April 21st to 23rd, I'm going to be in San Diego, California at the Portal to Ascension conference. So if there are any of your viewers from Southern California who would be interested in attending that, you know, they can just click on the schedule link of the website mcremo.com and get information about that.
That is awesome. I'll try to push this interview so as to publish it in time for that. I don't know if I can promise it, but I'll try to. And well,
Yeah.
thank you, everybody. Thank you, Michael. And please stay a couple of minutes after we finish. I want to ask you a small question, all right?
Okay.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody, and bye-bye. Namaste.